At this point in time, we have numerous displays in the Naval Museum. There's a Wasp helicopter hanging close by. We also have numerous other artifacts which is of historical value. And our main aim ultimately is to assist and give a good display of what our history was like from the British when we took over in 1957 as the South African Navy. We also have numerous artifacts in terms of importance. In this instance, I would like to mention the accident which occurred in 1982 off Cape Point when one of our large frigates was erroneously sank with a loss of a number of lives. That display is also available or visible here in the Naval Museum. But in general, our main aim is to educate and show people what the history of the Navy is and was like. And we expect people to understand that there's more than that we are just more than a museum. There's much more to learn. And of course, as we all know, we are supposed to learn from history.
The history of the Navy is important to this museum because the full contribution is done here in this museum. Everything you see is exactly what's happened. We have pictures of people who've been in the Navy. We have models of ships. We have actual pieces of ships which have sank. We have many different, and we have interactive displays as well, where youngsters and kids can actually get a glimpse of what the Navy is really about. They can interact with the features that we have on display here at the museum. And the history is portrayed through many different ways. There are many different display areas and displays on display for you to actually view.
The importance of a museum as such, and in this instance the Naval Museum, we are here as a first stop to any young person's aspirations as far as the future is concerned. At present, we have the so-called ability skills development system in place, where people and children from school are then taught and or learned different aspects in terms of naval life, and it's for them to decide whether they would like to make the Navy their career, so to speak. Generally, with tours and people coming through, this is the first stop. In other words, as we call it, first impressions count. So this is the first open door, so to speak, for anybody that wants to learn about the Navy and the history per se, and also inquire from us as to what they could do to join the Navy sometime in the future to make it their career. Our main aim is, as per like any other museum, if we can save as much as possible for the future, then we'll achieve a lot, so to speak. At this point in time, due to storage space and display areas, we can only accommodate smaller items, which is quite visible and for people to see close by.
Well, the importance of the museum would be to keep the history of the Navy alive, so people can see how it was back then compared to now, because without people back then, we wouldn't be where we are now.
The museum has a rich history, and I believe that it contributes a lot, especially to the coming generation, because what we learn here at the museum can help the generation about the rich history of the Navy.
In most cases, these artifacts, like any other museum, has been collected over the years, and at that point in time, people deemed them to be historical, or shall I say, museum-related items, so to speak. Any museum relies on donations from the public and from other entities, but in our case, in the SA Navy, ours are generally items received from naval personnel, and also what we have inherited from the previous Royal Navy. The Royal Navy was and has always been a seagoing nation, and we in South Africa is the same, and that's how we related and how we do relate from the Royal Navy. In 57, when the dockyard, or the Navy per se, South African Navy actually originated, so to speak, the handover with the dockyard, we inherited a few frigates from them and other paraphernalia, so to speak. And as you can see in the museum, a lot of items is proof of that rich history which emanated from overseas, from the British, which we inherited, and that's how our Navy still grows all the time. In the museum we have it's called a mock-up display of the inside of an old Daphne submarine. In the early 70s we received 3 Daphne submarines from France, which two unfortunately was scrapped and sold, but we have one which we would like to turn into a public display. At this point in time there is movement afoot to get that going, but here in the museum we have that kind of technology where people can learn what technology was like in the good old days and what technology is at present. As you know, technology is like computers. It just never ends. It's always a better computer.
I can see that the technology in the Navy has advanced, and compared to the past, people have learned from their mistakes and done better on things that have happened in the past. So, I mean, with the museum, you can see the history over here and how things have advanced and become better and much more simpler for the sailors of today.
Here is the so-called building blocks for any engineer, prospective engineer, or anybody who wants to join the Navy. Here at least they can see what the technology was like in the good old days and what technology will be and is at this moment in time.
The machinery back then was a lot more complicated to use than the machinery now. So if I had to use the machinery from back then, I would need a teacher and possibly someone that could really teach me how to use it better.
The ways in which the public can interact with the museum is when visiting the museum, we have different displays, one of which being Bridge of a Minesweeper, which actually moves and gives you that feel of being in the ocean on a ship, which is quite amazing. I mean, kids love that. My favorite part of this museum is probably the piece of the SAS Kruger, which is outside. I mean, that's something that it's something so valuable, and it's not anything that appears in any other museum. It's only here. And it's a piece of history. I mean, that ship sank and people passed on there. So their family members come here and they get to see what actually happened there. It's something that means a lot. I mean, people come in here and they see pictures of their loved ones who passed away on that ship, and they leave here with the feeling of, oh, I'm important. There was some sort of history that my great-grandfather left behind.
As far as the transformation is concerned, yes, we have to bring everybody aboard. The issue at this point in time is to bring people and make them learned, get them to be interested in the Navy, and of course, ultimately, if they would like to join the Navy and make it their career.
Some people said black people can't swim, but the way I come from, in KwaZulu-Natal, I learned to swim at a young age. That's where, and my friend, there was a white guy, we did life-saving with him, and he told me I can make it in the diving branch. So I apply, and then they accept me in 1998. I didn't know there is no black people in the diving branch in the SA Navy. I thought maybe there's black people. But when I get to Cape Town, I was shocked. When I get to Saldanha, they asked me, are you coming for divers course or diving? I said, yes, I'm coming for diving. They were shocked, even instructors were shocked. They didn't know, that's why they ended up calling me, they gave me some nicknames in Saldanha, Black Devil. So they were shocked, and then some of them were happy. So, but yes, diving, I didn't think about diving. My aim was to join the Navy as a Navy diver. I didn't know once I get to somewhere in the diving branch, it's going to be so difficult. But where I am, I made it. My first dive in a swimming pool, I felt so happy. I felt so happy to be able to dive underwater and put that equipment. Because, as you know, with black people background, we're not experienced on those things. The white people, yes, because sometimes they join this diving school, Paris and Naui from a young age. Here I am, for me, come from the rural areas and then try the divers course in the Navy. My first dive, oh, I was happy.
A couple of years ago, there was an inquiry from one of our senior officers pertaining to a display on so-called transformation, which we all know is important throughout even normal spheres of life. And in this instance, the rest of the Defence Force was not sure as to how to go about putting a transformation display together. And we at the Navy here at the Naval Museum in Somerstown, we took the lead, as a matter of fact, to put together this transformation display. It mainly entails a timeline from '94 to present, indicating who joined the Navy, and I make reference to the Indians, for example, the first females to join the Navy, the first blacks to join the Navy, so to speak, and numerous other important matters and occurrences which took place since '94. So that is depicted in our so-called transformation display, which I've indicated as well as being a timeline with graphic information plus dates showing the whole process since '94.
Challenges I have, okay, swimming-wise, physically, and swimming, because I grew up swimming, did life saving. My challenge was mathematics and physics, like a study. But yes, some of the white guys that did course with me, they helped me. When I was told I was first black diver in the Navy, yes, I feel so happy. I was proud for myself because I opened the doors for the other young people who are gonna come.
Before coming to the Navy, I had no idea about the SA Navy. So I was introduced to the Navy by my aunt who was working at SAMS by then. So I applied for the Navy and the SAMS, but I was accepted in the Navy because I studied maths and science.
I chose the Navy as the organization that I would like to build my career in because I've always had an interest in public relations. And after the research that I've done, I've realized that the Navy offers various career paths in the public relations department as a whole. So it was a great opportunity for me to grow in public relations.
My father was in the Navy and my mother, so I had some experience with the Navy before I joined. But I didn't know of the positions in the Navy before I joined.
My impression about the Navy, I had no idea. I joined the Navy in 2010, and that was my first time coming to Cape Town. We went to Saldanha for basic training, and the training was 6 months. So it was life-changing because I had no idea that I would change from being a civilian into a uniformed personnel.
Before I joined the Navy, I never really knew exactly what to expect coming into the military. All I could think of was strict boot camp sort of a lifestyle. Everything is done by routine, everything is done on time, to the point. There's no beating around the bush.
The perceptions people have about the Navy is that when you get here, you wear the uniform, but that's not really the idea, because when you get here, you learn about the discipline, you learn about different races and the culture of the Navy.
Now that I'm actually in the Navy, I've realized that it's not only about that routine sort of living. There's a lot of different aspects that go together to make this Navy successful. Our cultures, our different backgrounds, and the way we've grown up, we blend that all together and we learn to work as a team. And that's what actually makes this Navy successful. It's the people that grow the Navy.
My experience in the Navy when I joined, I realized that the Navy is bigger than I thought, because I was mainly in Pretoria when I knew the Navy. When I moved to Simonstown, I realized that there's actually a lot going on and a lot of people doing a lot of different roles in the Navy, and without them, the Navy couldn't function as good as it should be.
The old Navy from the new Navy, there's a lot of transformation that went through. Because before the World War II, females were not allowed to join the Navy. And after the transformation, they allowed women to join the Navy. So I think it has changed a lot. And by giving women opportunity to join the Defense Force.
As a young woman in the Navy, I believe that there are plenty of opportunities for us as women to grow, both individually and as a group. Many people think that the military is for men. Men can only survive the training and the effort that goes behind the scenes. But they don't realize that once you put your mind through it, you can actually conquer whatever is thrown at you. And I'm a great example of that because I'm a young woman who've just recently joined the Navy. And I've been through many things that I never thought I could ever go through. And I've succeeded in it. I'm now a uniformed member of the SANDF in the Navy.
We have a classic example of a mannequin that's dressed as a uniform white female. The uniqueness pertaining to that is not the fact that the mannequin is white, it is the uniform that that individual wore in the Second World War, which makes it very unique in terms of the dress, the cut of the uniform, the accessories, etc. The same applies to any other mannequins in the museum, the different dresses. We presently in the Navy have quite a few different changes of uniform. The dress or uniform I'm wearing at the moment is the general so-called office dress. Then there is what we call the blues or 4AW, which is our working clothing, which is a blue long sleeve shirt with a dark blue trouser and black shoes. So, and of course, depending on the change of season, our parade uniform is, as we call in summer, it's called the ice cream suit, which is a very difficult uniform to wear, difficult to keep clean, etc., etc. But then again, in winter, we have our so-called blacks, which is a black uniform with jacket, black trousers and shoes and a cap, for example. So the display of uniforms in the building as such is also shows how uniforms and clothing has changed throughout the years. And that is also unique about the Navy. It's the clothing and the uniform that you wear every day.
The Transformation Museum is relevant, and I think that they should preserve the information that is here because people can learn a lot from what has happened in the past and what has happened in the old Navy. The old Navy has contributed a lot into the new Navy, and I believe that a lot of people have learned from the old Navy. Hence, we have a rich culture in the SA Navy.
In terms of transformation in general, there was this requirement from senior officers that we should indicate how transformation started and how it presently affects the Navy and or the whole of the Defence Force as such. We at first thought that it was just a normal, the white man's Navy, so to speak. But we came to the conclusion that it is, in general, a Navy for South Africa, for South Africans, so to speak. And presently, we are known as the People's Navy. So to emphasize and to include everybody, the call was made to introduce the Navy to everybody, and that is where we, from '94, and actually prior to '94, it was policy to bring in all spheres of life, so to speak. Not just the colors, for example, but females as well, black people, etc., etc.
At this stage, the Navy has contributed a lot in my career. I've went to a lot of courses that made it easy for me to work in the department that I'm in at the moment. So I will contribute towards that, and I believe that the young generation that is coming in to the Navy will have a bright future.
Since I joined the Navy, especially diving, yes, there was a African people that were in the Navy before me, but in diving branch. they are increasing. Even now, we got the facilitators who are Africans, who are blacks, especially also some of them they're from like up in Joburg. As you know, Joburg, there's no sea. But now they are. There are some of them, they're warrants, the officers.
Okay, when I researched about the Navy, and when I came into the Navy, it's something totally different from what I've researched, especially when I got to basic training, because the training, it was hard. And many times I thought of quitting, but I told myself that I can do this. And then it has changed my life tremendously. So I think being here, it was the right choice that I took.
The first year, well, our 6 months of basic training, which is basically boot camp, we learned basic military skills. That was tough. It's coming from the civilian world into the military world. It's a huge adjustment. Not many people can handle it, but if you put your mind to it, you can succeed in completing the course. It's 6 months of physical training and theoretical training where you learn sort of the history of the Navy and how to adapt to the lifestyle of the Navy.
Being in the Navy as a black woman has taught me that nothing is impossible. As I've learned that you can work as different races but still be equal. One of the stories that I learned in the Navy, it was about Job Masejo. Job Masejo was one of the brave men in the Navy because during the war, he was one of the men that created a bomb out of a tin and some substances that he picked up from the ships that were coming in. So I've learned that he was very brave, and despite the circumstances that was happening there, he became brave and stood up.
The Naval Museum, although it's housed, as I said, within a very old building, which was a sail loft and a mast house, we also have a section which is presently still dedicated as a chapel. That happened because of a church which was built up against the mountainside. There was landslip that took place and the church was damaged, and the congregation inquired whether they could use a section of this building in which we are at the moment for their congregation, and that was then deemed necessary, and that's how the chapel actually originated. And yes, we do have ceremonies taking place, we have christenings taking place, also marriages, etc. But generally it's on request, but otherwise it is open for uniform personnel in terms of weddings, christenings, etc.
My name is Warrant Officer Greg Forer. I presently am employed at the Submarine Training Center as a computer-based training facilitator. I was on submarines before my accident, and I was a diver as well before my accident. I joined the Navy in 1983 as a Navy diver and then moved across to submarines, where I qualified as an artisan in electronics in the late 80s, and I've been involved with submarines and diving ever since. I love being in the Navy because it brings me close to the water to begin with, and water has always been a very important part of my life. I love working at the Submarine Training Center as a computer-based training facilitator because I'm teaching the youth about submarines going forward in the Navy in the future and incorporating a lot of new knowledge into their young careers. I believe the museum, the South African Naval Museum, is very important, especially for the people in and on the Cape Peninsula, because it is steeped in a lot of history. And even since 1994, when our country changed, we've improved and come first in many aspects of the Navy, in various exercises involved with overseas navies. The favorite part of the museum for me is probably the church, because it is so old and it has a lot of history in and around where the church is in the West Dockyard of the Navy. I got married in the Navy chapel in 2005 to my second wife, and the reason for me wanting to be married in the Naval Chapel was because of the history it has behind it, and it's a wonderful venue to get married in, and we were also able to host the after party within the West Dockyard of the Navy, so it was very convenient at that time. Plus it was close to the water, which is very close to my heart. The day that I got married, well, one of the stipulations from my new wife was she wasn't going to marry me in my electric wheelchair, and I would have to push myself down the aisle in a manual wheelchair, which I am presently sitting in. So that was quite exciting for me, and the fact that the best man at my second wedding was actually best man at my first wedding. So second time round, he was there to support me once again. I was filled with a lot of anxiety. Didn't really know my lines for the wedding ceremony, but managed to get through quite nicely thanks to the help of my wife and my daughter. As it is now, fortunately, has become a little bit more wheelchair friendly, which is a great aspect from my point of view. However, just the warmth and the fact that it's so well kept and that we have a lot of foreign visitors to it just goes to show and proves that the concept of the Naval Museum is very important in and around Simonstown, you know, and with its history behind it.
From a historical point of view, this is the start or the footstep, the first stone, so to speak, in terms of naval history in Simonstown. Here you get a glimpse of what the Simonstown looked like way back in the early 1800s, how it changed, how the shoreline changed, new buildings being erected, etc. But ultimately, if you're interested in history, then this is where it starts. This is the door to the Navy in the past and Navy in the present.
The importance of the museum is the history of South Africa. When the youngster, when they grew up, they can they can see the background. Yes, the point is the history, because the ways of history come from in the museums. Also, it attracts also the tourists from outside the country. They can see what's happening in our countries.
The museum is important to the Navy as it's a platform for the public to come and actually get an inside glimpse of what the Navy is all about.
I would like the museum to continue because at the end of the day, as I've explained, it's not just our generation and our kids, so to speak, it's all the future generations that would like to know and see and learn when they come through our doors. My ultimate aim is to make the area much larger and access other buildings where we can put in more displays, because my motto has always been, whatever happens today is history tomorrow.